Hello, everyone, and welcome. The TRB Task Force on Knowledge Management presents Tools for the Zombie Apocalypse, Avoiding the Brain Drain in Transportation Organizations. I'm Becky Burke of the Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway Administration, and I'll be your moderator today. This is the second of a two-part series. The first part was held on July 13th. It was recorded, so in case you missed it, you can go back and listen to it. These two webinars are a result of a session of the same name that was well received at the annual TRB conference last January. The presenters in these two webinars are the same presenters from the TRB session. This webinar will be recorded and posted online on the netwc.net website. Don't worry, there'll be a direct link at the webinar follow-up email that you can click on. One more thing, please use the chat pod to ask questions, which we will collect and answer at the end of each presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Northeast Transportation Workforce Center for organizing this webinar, and also thank the co-sponsors, TRB Standing Committee on Transportation, Education, and Training, the National Network for the Transportation Workforce, the National Transportation Training Directors, and the American Public Transportation Association Workforce Center. So let's get started. As you probably know, information is coming in and knowledge is going out more rapidly than anticipated. Not only are we losing knowledge from longtime employees, but consultants and contractors as well, who have an equal amount of knowledge that could escape at any moment. So how can transportation agencies make sure that essential knowledge is retained? And how can they make sure that employees have access to the right information at the right time to be effective and contribute to the success of the organization? This session will focus on recent guidance and current practices that transportation agencies can apply to tackle these challenges. Our presenters today are Dr. Donna Cuomo of the MITRE Corporation and Ben Pesciu of AEM Corporation. First up is Dr. Cuomo, but let me give you a brief intro on her presentation. Dr. Donna Cuomo, whose presentation is titled Anticipatory Knowledge, is the Associate Director of the Knowledge, Information, and Collaboration Technology Division within MITRE's Center for Information and Technology. Currently, Donna is implementing MITRE's Anticipatory Knowledge Delivery Strategy. She is recognized in the external community, has won numerous awards for her team's work on MITRE's digital workplace, including being a repeat recipient of the Most Admired Knowledge Enterprise Award, and has presented on her work at numerous conferences and forums. She holds a PhD in Industrial and Systems Engineering from SUNY Buffalo with a concentration in Human Factors Engineering/User Interface Design. Dr. Cuomo will share MITRE's approach to anticipating the knowledge and process needs of employees and delivering the right information at the right time via notifications and tailored guidance. Donna?
Thank you, Becky. It's glad to be here. I'll just dive right in. I hope you're seeing my screen okay. For those who don't know what MITRE is, we work for a variety of government agencies. We operate 7 federally funded research and development centers for, as you can see here, a wide range of sponsors. And we try to solve problems for a safer world. Because of the breadth of the FFRDCs that we have, and then the number of different portfolios that this results in, knowledge sharing is a big deal for us. And we want to make sure that at all times, one part of the company knows what's being worked on and whether there's work or knowledge that can be leveraged and reused in another part of the company. So knowledge sharing is very critical. And as you were saying, getting new employees onboarded into our processes and the way we work quickly is another efficiency that we're always trying to improve. So we're going to talk a little bit about our journey today. We've had a strategy in place for several years to become a knowledge-driven enterprise. And I'm not going to have time to go into all parts of this, but putting KM into the end user's workflow was a part of it. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the way we allowed users, our staff, to exploit the resources, those knowledge resources that were being captured. And we also did a lot on reporting and insights that I won't go too much into. And all of this was going to lead to enhanced products and outcomes from our work program. But we learned a lesson along the way, and that was there was something missing that turned out to be critical, and that was this notion of anticipatory knowledge delivery. I'm going to just quickly step through our journey. Our journey was showing that we needed to get a look at all the tools and the processes we were providing in sort of role-based ways, by functional area, what are the steps in solving a project problem, executing a project, how do we onboard people into their roles quicker? And this resulted in a plethora of tools and processes. We build a lot of our tools custom. For example, these are some of the tools that show how we capture our portfolio work program. We have something called project pages, where every of the 2,000 projects we might be executing in any one year, we have them capture what is the outcome they're trying to achieve, the data-driven products they're going to produce in support of that project, what actionable recommendations are they going to make to our sponsors to move the sponsor mission forward. We have very detailed profiles of our organizations and the capabilities they provide. We have very detailed profiles of our staff. What experience do they have? What expertise do they bring to a problem? What documents have they produced? So we have this pretty sophisticated suite of work program tools. Then we talked about exploiting those resources. We have a pretty sophisticated search capability. In addition to full text search, we provide faceted search of a lot of our key knowledge objects, whether it's searching those project work plans that we talked about. You can see there's many fiscal years worth of project work plans here, whether it's searching people by their expertise and experience, whether it's searching for particular documents, all in a faceted, filterable way so you can get to write what you're looking for. So we thought this was a lovely suite of tools. We have a customized homepage, right? And this, what we call the Discover bar, shows all those key knowledge assets of the company. So you can get to those people pages, you could search those project plans, you could search those orgs and their capability areas, right? Again, patting ourselves on the back because this is a great tool suite. But what we found is with our through attrition and with our hiring rate for some growth, we were for a few years hiring 700 to 800 new staff members a year in different roles. And even staff who had been here for a while, we were constantly upgrading and changing our capabilities, our processes, how we worked, and the tools available to them. So the landscape was constantly changing and evolving, right? And we really didn't have good, consistent role-based onboarding. And we were finding that the staff were so focused on the complexity of the challenge of the work that they were doing, because as you all know, everything had to be faster, projects were accelerating, the challenges in the government space were just very large. We realized we needed to do even more to support the end user. It was still too complicated. They needed assisting. So we started thinking about, if you look at the commercial space, right, you're in Amazon, you buy something, right away they start suggesting things that you might also want, right? They're anticipating your needs based on your profile and being suggestive. If you search now in full text search, instead of just getting search results back, right, somebody's anticipated, if you're looking for Walgreens, maybe there's some key aspects of Walgreens you're most likely to want to know about, like their hours or their directions or their phone. And so they make that, they anticipate that, right? And they make that easy for you to get to. So we started thinking, how could we apply that principle in our work process program guidance and employee onboarding space? Could we make it this easy for our users? So we started moving into this direction of anticipatory assistance for staff. And if you notice, when I quickly flashed on our intranet homepage, there is a thing called My Actions. And this we had for a while, actually, but it mostly had been used to alert users to when they needed to do a compliance action, like your computer needed updating of a software application for security reasons, or something was waiting in a workflow approval system for you. We hadn't used it for guidance, onboarding, helping you figure out what step in a process you might want to do next. And so that became the vision of, this is a new employee example. If, for example, you're onboarding somebody new to a role, in this case, new employee, instead of hoping they go off and discover everything they need to know about how to work, right? How do we start to push them the right set of actions anticipatorily for them to become productive employees much more quickly? And that was an interesting process, because we really had to start to think about, what are the 6 or 7 most important things from a process or knowledge perspective we would want a new employee to know? And it turns out, we had never really thought about it from that point of view. And then once we had thought about it, like, we want them to tag themselves. Our people pages let you put in free-form tags of your expertise, and so you can be found by skill, right? We want you to know how to find people by their expertise, so you can go and find like-minded people, or find people for a project, et cetera, or join, communities of practice. So again, instead of waiting for them to discover that, let's just tell them to go do it. And then we realized we didn't really have this kind of broken down into little bite-sized chunks, so that when they got one of these anticipatory knowledge delivery items, they could go get the quick little digest version of how to do it. But that was the idea. And so over the past 2 full fiscal years, we rolled this out for new employee onboarding, including asking them to subscribe to some topical newsletters that our information services staff made available. We rolled it out for new project leader onboarding. We started rolling also new portfolio leader onboarding, and then we started rolling it out to assist existing staff to step through various operational processes. And I'll talk about those in a little more detail. But this shows at any one point in time, based on now what your status is, what your role you're in, you'll start getting these the way you work types of notifications of things you probably should go do or learn about. And again, those then lead to these bite-sized chunks that give you the business case, why, because we still feel you always need to convince people, and then how. So I'm going to walk through just, I think, 2 of these quickly. One is the new employee onboarding experience. So what was interesting about this, again, so I'm in ITKM, right, but we have an HR department that's separate. We had a corp comm division, and of course you had your hiring manager and a new employee onboarding experience. And the way it was pre the beginning of this activity, we had a baseline what was happening already, and it turns out new employees were receiving something like 54 forms, 84 pieces of documentation by the time they accepted on the first day. They were only getting a half a day orientation to the company. Computers were sort of independently delivered to the offices. All sorts of corporate, services just started sending them emails in a random way. And I think the best way to explain this was, it was not designed from the consumer perspective, right? Nobody in the corporation has sat down and said, what should this look like from the new employee perspective, and how should we make it this nice integrated process? Instead, it just sort of happened to people. And they weren't getting very well onboarded, and actually they were complaining to our CEO when he met with them at the time, saying, wow, that was just this half a day of hodgepodgeness, and I'm kind of confused. So again, this was a small part of it, but our part was to figure out how to walk them through those how we work onboarding steps. So we built a system, an event messaging system, and like I said, we thought about what are the in this case 8 things we want them to know, and we started pushing these over a 3-week period. So they would go off and, like I said, tag themselves and publish their resume and join communities of practice and learn how to use our search capabilities, etc. But we did that while also working with HR. So we started to across the enterprise to design this process so that it was usable and functional and hopefully enjoyable. And interestingly, HR was already thinking of that same thing, the knowledge that this is a journey, right? And you onboard people over time. It's not just the first day of orientation. So that fit in well with what we had been thinking. So then we started taking a lot of their the notifications and learning they wanted to happen over time and adding them to our push notification system. So now we had a nice new employee journey map flow of how this was going to work, including this notion of onboarding people and digitally assisting them through what they needed to know. What was nice about this, HR did a survey. This actually showed help desk calls. Help desk calls went down because now their computers were being delivered to them at orientation. They extended that to a full day. They were using their computers. They got training in different areas. Employees felt very satisfied. Most of their feedback notifications went, their satisfaction around the whole onboarding was over 90%. And when they were asked about things they liked about the process, they actually mentioned these actionable notifications. So we felt that was a success, and we are continuing to refine that process, but it's way improved. This is just another example. So for existing project leaders keep staff plans in a system that we have, and often if they needed a staff member on their project, they would put in something called the TBD, meaning they didn't have a staff for that. So what we started doing, and that was in, like I said, the staff planning system. So when we saw a TBD, we call that a trigger event, go into somebody's staff plan, and we checked how long they had been a project leader. If they hadn't been a project leader for very long, or they hadn't tried to fill a TBD in a long time, what we did was we would push them an actionable notification. Here's what it looked like, saying, here are actions and options you can take to do something about that November unstaffed staff role you have on your project. And when you click on that, that would take you to a page we specially created called, signaling demand and staffing your project. We're always tweaking our staffing tools, how to find staff for projects. So this meant they could always go to a page that would have the most up-to-date resources for how to quickly find a staff on their project, because that's important to our project work, right? That you have the right expertise and you have all the expertise you need. And we found in this case, up to 66% of recipients on average were actually clicking on this to go figure out how to find staffing. Once this is set up, that's like free, right? You're getting people onboarded for free. You're getting people the best process guidance for free. And again, this was some project leader feedback. We did a lot more for project leaders than I had time to talk about here. But what was important, I thought, was some of the feedback we were getting, like this middle box, was the staff were saying that this was useful to them because they didn't have to go digging for the information. Just the notion that, or I like this one here, having any content at all pushed to me was very unexpected and helpful. In other words, you're not just giving them more action items, you're actually helping them do the work that they're trying to do almost at the same time they were realizing, or maybe didn't even realize, what they needed to know. So it's just flipping that model around of really assisting people. So as we've gone along this journey, besides continuing to support more processes and more onboarding, learning, and guidance, we've continued to work on the process itself, the whole system. So one thing we realized, we weren't really firm initially with dates. If something like needs to be updated on your desktop that has a date and this turns red as it gets closer, we were trying to be a little bit more subtle, but we did find that people tend to ignore subtle. So we decided to introduce dates on almost everything. But we also went to this ActY help format to make it a little more action oriented, to make sure they understood why they were doing it. And then if you were doing something in a system and we knew you did it, we could dismiss the action automatically. But there were some actions that we would have a difficult time knowing if you did it or not. This is one of a more administrative example, but you still have to submit part of your retirement program elections on paper, I guess. So when you click the I'm done, we wanted them to tell us whether they had done it or not. So we actually came up with different options when people said they were done based on the situation to tell us whether they did it or they didn't do it or did it not apply to them. And what was interesting here is, now we're actually kind of having a conversation with people. We were getting feedback from them. So that was interesting. And then we realized things like new employees were so new, whereas an experienced employee knew that if they had an action in their My Actions, they were supposed to do it. New employees didn't even get that. So we realized that an introductory email to new employees explaining the program and how they were going to be onboarding and how this works was needed, and that actually helped them learn about this concept, and then they had a higher increase in completing their guided notifications. So it was an interesting journey, and then we found out the project leaders really liked these summary links, and they wanted them to stay on their homepage. So we created what we call the reference shelf, so that these, it also became a set of quick links to some of the most up-to-date guidance in the company. So that was an interesting thing too, that the users didn't always want the links to the content to go away. So in summary, some of the takeaways, what was eye-opening to me is we used to walk around a little bit frustrated, right? We'd be sending out news center announcements about this new capability and that new capability and this new capability, and we'd be like, why don't people know these things? Why don't people do the things we ask them to do? But when you really step back and say, okay, what are those things? Have we laid it out sequentially, and have we broken it down to little bite-sized chunks? The answer was, not so much. So you can get work process guidance and knowledge to employees, using today's technology, whether it's email or pushing little notifications to your portal or their cell phones or whatever is useful for your company. But you really have to think about what are those critical business processes or activities fundamental to your staff and their roles or their operations, and start small and deploy agilely. But it was really thinking through the process and how your IT capabilities and knowledge systems could support it that I think had a lot of value. It wasn't a technology issue so much as, what do people really need to know, and looking at that from a corporate design perspective. Because if you can't concisely state that for different key roles or key business processes, if you don't know what the top 10 things they should be doing in an area, then they probably don't know either. Other ways to get that information is to talk to staff who've been in a new role and say, what did you wish you knew? Or ask the managers and say, what questions do you most get? Or do you feel staff, project leaders, whatever your key roles are, need to know? And that can get you started with the onboarding, with the knowledge recommending, et cetera. And then if you can look for those trigger events, right? How do you know? It's pretty easy to know when a new employee joined the company. How do you know when someone took on a new role? How do you know when, again, operationally, somebody needs to put a staff on their project? Somebody might benefit from certain types of content being sent to them. You have to try to figure out when you can determine someone has a need for information or process support. And then try to design it from the end user consumption perspective, that a good digital experience. That was it. I see a question here. Customized systems look like they are the best. Or, go ahead.
No, I can read it. I was on mute. I'm sorry. Customized systems look like they are the best for an organization, but without the capacity to set one up, at least initially, what tools off the shelf might be used?
Off the shelf, yeah. So there's we at the base of our system had an open source product called RabbitMQ. It was an event messaging system. So that's one. You could set up some kind of script that could send emails to people. Before we had this system, we actually learned HR had invested a little bit in getting an email-based system going. You can do that through sort of newsletter type systems sometimes, with a particular audience target that might be a little less generic, or would be more generic. But yeah, that's there's a profile component to this as well, right? So you need to understand who is the target audience in any one of these. What's the trigger event that's going to send it to those people, and what do you want them to know, and then get that content in place. So yeah, if you're really doing pure off the shelf, again, it's hard for me to answer that without knowing what that is. For new employees, again, it might be they get an email, and then maybe the email has 2 things they should do this week, and then the next week they get 2 things they should do the next week, and there's links in that to take them to the material you want them to interact with, for example.
Okay, thank you. I have a question, Donna. When you were saying we did this, and then we realized, this, and then we did this, and, then we realized the end user we weren't looking at it from their perspective. I see that you had surveys and things, but did you have any of them? Did you have a new employee or a few new employees on your panel to find out what they really needed?
Believe it or not, we started by just saying, what do we want them to know? Because we had like a pent up set of basics, for lack of a better term, right? Mm-hmm. As you saw at the beginning, we kind of have a fairly well-defined way of working. So we knew they needed to know those things. So we're like, well, let's start with those, and then we can iterate. It's not that hard to add another one of these kind of thing, right? And then that's what happened. And we have like new employee meet and greets, even within our own center. So when I would introduce myself to new employees, and I would say, oh, and we work on that system that introduces you to how to work at MITRE. And it's funny because there's always 1 or 2 new employees who say, oh, thank you, because they're so like relieved that they got that little tutorial guidance to know how to get started with working in a new company. And then we have some of our HCI people, they call new employees up and they survey them. And we learned, for example, that people wanted even more information on the IT tool suite and the knowledge management tool suite. So we started augmenting this by offering a 1-hour in-person, virtual overview of all of the tools available to them supporting this process. So again, it was starting that dialogue, have that conversation, and I think it's a process that's going to continue to evolve forever, really, right?
I would hope. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Donna. We're going to have to cut the questions off right now because we've got to move to Ben, but I do want to reiterate that you can use the chat pod, and we will get questions for Ben at the end of his presentation, and if you have any more for Donna, please put those in there as well. So now I'd like to introduce Ben Pesciu. Ben's presentation is titled Guidance for Development and Management of Sustainable Information Portals. He serves as a senior data scientist for the Institute of Educational Science / Department of Education, providing technical advice and support on the maintenance and enhancement of Education Resources Information Center, otherwise known as ERIC, the world's largest library of digital education literature. Ben has served as subject matter expert for the Brookings Institution, Google, Department of Defense, and the intelligence community, just to name a few. His presentation summarizes the results of a recent NCHRP study that created a guide for development and management of effective DOT enterprise information portals, EIPs. The guide is intended to help agency business management personnel understand the issues to be addressed in making information and data about the state's transportation system and agency operations available to information users and the responsibilities and the cost associated with portal development and maintenance. The guide will also help agency information technology managers develop strategies for evolving existing EIPs and creating new ones to effectively and sustainably deliver information of value to users. So Ben, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Becky.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me in this presentation. I apologize in advance. I'm not in my office. I'm in a public place, and I may have a few background noises, so I wanted to apologize in advance for that. So this presentation is pretty much a copy of the national webinar that was done for NCHRP 2103, which was focused on the development of guidance for the development of sustainable management of sustainable information portals for transportation agencies. And in this briefing, pretty much what we're going to look at is pretty much what is an enterprise information portal in the context of the transportation agencies. How do we achieve sustainability of an EIP, enterprise information portal, with regards to the changes happening in IT and in data these days, and the frequency at which these changes are happening, and the various changes in technology that happen, in particular with an architecture referred to as a microservice architecture pattern, which is a fairly recent one. We will be talking about how to design this enterprise information portal, what technology would be recommended for an implementation of an enterprise information portal, and a little bit more about microservices, what they are, and sort of give an example with an asset management example of how such an implementation could be done. And we'll be briefly touching on a migration strategy from what is considered a traditional monolithic IT architecture to a microservice architecture. And then we will be talking about the non-technical challenges for such implementations within DOTs, ranging from cultures to procurements and all the legal restrictions. So what is an EIP? An EIP, is often known as a business portal, is pretty much a website that serves as a single gateway for an entire company information and knowledge base for employees, customers, business partners, and the general public. It integrates management information system, it integrates decision support system, enterprise information system, and Alberta technology. GIS is a very common one that's being integrated in DOTs. EIPs are often have applications that are tailored for specific groups and specific users within the enterprise, and they provide access to a broad range of resources and services, to a variety of interface that could be a web, a desktop application, a mobile interface, a GIS interface with mapping, some visualization, some reporting. So a lot of different requests, a lot of different use and different processing requirements and things that are happening in the EIP. What are the common services offered by a DOT EIP? Asset management, engineering and maintenance services are often on a DOT EIP, GIS and mapping services, like I said, operation and performance management services, TMC software, such as the one used in Oregon, for example, are on a DOT EIP, document and library services, billing contract services, procurements, in particular the ones where sometimes the DOT EIP has to work in concerts with a state procurement system, IT services in order to maintain the numbers of laptops or servers that are actually desktop systems and backup systems that are within the agency and maintain them in real time. Environmental services. Environmental services here are considered pretty broadly, but they're pretty much everything that monitors what is affecting the system. the infrastructure of the transportation agency. So that can range from pretty much earthquake sensors, like the California Department of Transportation has its entire network, and our WIS systems and other systems that picks up either the effect of specific events or wear and tear on the infrastructure itself, a public outreach service such as the 511 systems, or any system talking about the procurements or the RFP being published, of photo and video service systems, which is used for either the traffic camera or various photos that are being used for publishing the construction of a bridge or things like that. And then the financial service system to be able to do the accounting and all the financial tasks that are required to run the DOT. So our Department of Transportation implementing DOT EIPs these days, where typically they have multiple platforms, multiple portals, multiple services that are not very well integrated and are pretty much each standalone and not really universal, but distributed across the entire states for the larger states. They are typically more integrated, an internal portal and more integrated than externally facing portals. So there's very little ability for the portal to be able to interact with other portals within the DOTs or even outside the DOTs in case you want to share things with a contractor, for example. Like a GIS drawing or something like that, which would have to be done through an FTP site but not directly from interaction with the portal as it is. And the technology and architecture of the portal vary widely based on the size, the budget, and the expertise within the state DOT, and the requirements that are being imposed on how to manage the data. So it's pretty much a very difficult task, depending on the services, to organize a DOT EIP, and is currently done pretty much in a very distributed fashion. So what is sustainability in the context of an enterprise information portal? So sustainability is the ability for an enterprise to meet its present need without compromising its ability to meet its future needs. And one of the future needs that every DOT is thinking of is connected vehicle. And it comes from pretty much an increased amount of data. It comes with an increased amount of data processing. It comes with new interfaces, new infrastructure to manage, new assets to manage on the roadways. And the goal of this and sustainable EIP would be to be able to allow the transformation of the EIP without compromising the way it's being structured right now. And a lot of people during the research were thinking that sustainability for an EIP was mostly to pretty much find funding for the money, but it also is technology, in policies, in procedures, and in governance. And nowadays, most of the systems that are designed to be sustainable are based on two cornerstones in order to build resiliency of the systems within an EIP. And it's typically replaceability, so the ability for the components of the systems to be replaced easily without compromising everything. And I would add actually disposability as well, which is a lot of things that is found in very large systems such as cloud storage and every cloud software as a service offering. So one of the architecture that has been known and well known to be offering this kind of service is called the service-oriented architecture. And it is not just an architecture of services from a technology perspective, but there are also policies and practices and frameworks that are in place to ensure that the right services are being consumed by the right people. The basic principle is pretty much being able to have a framework where independent vendors and services and products can be deployed, put in production, maintained, retired, without having to completely redesign the system. So one of the typical recommendation is to move away from a monolithic and very tightly integrated portal application to go to a more modular and service-oriented application. Another recommendation is to use a lot less in-house hardware and data storage in-house, but to use more distributed hardware and data storage and leveraging cloud services to do so. And this is often to be have that scalability or that ability to provision additional resources very quickly at very little cost and very little overhead without having to go through procurements to buy new servers. To rely more and more on distributed software on Portal, and this is kind of like with the arrival of larger amount of data, surge in data processing will be happening, not just because a report needs to be done at the end of a quarter or at the end of a day or at the end of a month, but the amount of processing can happen can be enormous, but on a very short period of time. And in case you have to run this on-premise, you would have to pretty much acquire the IT equipment in order to perform at peak. And while the rest of the year, if it's only four reports every quarter for an entire year, the rest of the time, most of this equipment will not be used. Whereas on the cloud service, this would be able to just be and then scaled down. Another aspect of the recommendation for sustainable AIP coming out of research is to use less integrated management of individual portal and to give more and more autonomy in portal. And this has a little bit more to do with governance. And a lot of state DOTs have recommendation for software, recommendation for hardware, and often these do not necessarily work well with some of the requirements of some of the different services we talked about. So some software recommendations for file sharing, for example, that are decided or procured agency-wide may have more of a GIS aspect to it and may not very well fit the financial services needs. And so the recommendations here are to pretty much try to do less integration and give more autonomy to each of the application and services. So one of the recommendations that came in, and we've heard from other people that actually a lot of people would be interested in doing cloud-only IT, but is trying to do a mix between on-premise and cloud IT infrastructure for a DOT AP. Well, why on-premise? Well, to meet some of the government regulation for sensitive data, when some unique or advanced security needs that goes beyond what cloud offerings are able to deliver. Often clouds are pretty security-wise, but sometimes they cannot match the requirements. Some especially financial data or sensitive data may want to be kept in-house. Bandwidth constraining accessibility to the last mile. So when the latency of getting the data from the cloud is just not feasible and the data needs to be processed in real time, although these days with modern cloud is starting, depending on the bandwidth you have to, the different building in your agency should be pretty good. And like I said, more direct control on the latency. For the cloud aspect, pretty much shifting the risk of IT infrastructure obsolescence to the cloud provider, where all you're requesting is processing capability for a specific time, for a specific amount, but not having to pretty much risk the fact that within 6 months to a year, the brand new servers that you bought are now obsolete and require an upgrade, which is happening quite quickly. And a goal is scalable and flexible and on-demand set of IT capabilities with the cloud, which pretty much the scaling capabilities on demand that the cloud's offering. Reduce the cost of IT infrastructure's operation and maintenance. I have time on my slides, but pretty much the same thing. So pretty much obtaining a lower cost profile while being able to use more resources. And the reason why clouds were set up is pretty much to be able to have a shared set of services, because at the level at which data was going to need to be processed, IT budgets often could not keep up with the needs of building IT infrastructures on premise. The best example I've seen in my career of this is the NOAA satellite operation and National Satellite Operation Facilities, which pretty much has 14 satellite programs that are going, beaming down weather data on a daily basis. And their latest program that they had, if they were to have designed an on-premise system, would have taken the entire budget for a ground system division of the NOAA National Satellite Operation Facility. And they pretty much figured out that they had to move to clouds, otherwise they would not have been able to implement those new systems because the amount of data that they were processing was so big. Yeah, I lost the control of my slides. Sorry about that. Go back to where I was. So why a distributed software architecture? A distributed software architecture in which the computing power and software is distributed across several servers, not just one big one, and connected through a network of communicating. And on the right, you can see pretty much how such systems are distributed. Often there's a set of servers serving interfaces, whatever they are. Some abstraction layers, often created through a set of distributed systems. A business service layers, which pretty much does the rendering or the aggregation of the data. Also with a set of businesses and abstraction layers and data sources also through this. And each application, such as process 1 and process 2 that you see on the chart, pretty much tap into sources. And as the users ask for more or less demand more or less from the systems they are currently using, the distributed system can allocate more or less servers to each of the tasks, whatever it's interface rendering, some kind of aggregation of the business service, or the data source. The abstractions layers are there so that interface systems can be upgraded independently from business services, independently from data sources, so that the system kept the sustainability where new data sources can be added without compromising the rest. So a brief introduction to microservices patterns. So in a traditional monolithic architecture, pretty much you would have components which are represented by the geometric shape you have here, and all into an application that would then run on a server that would be composed in a cluster. In a microservice architecture patterns, every single one of the components is an application, and independently it's what's called a container on the server. And it's pretty much, the components are independently scalable and talk to each other and can be reused by applications. So one of the analogy we've been using to describe this is the analogies of the modular space systems that DARPA developed called System F7 several, I think more than 10 years ago, where instead of having a big, huge monolithic satellites, which built-in redundancy and very tightly integrated systems, which runs the risk of being damaged by a solar flare minutes after it reaches orbit. The images and the new designs has been to create what they call CubeSats or microsatellites that only fulfill one function of the satellites, can be duplicated, and are very low cost, often running on cell phone IT hardware, and can be replaced very quickly. And each of these microsatellites pretty much fulfills one function: a communication function, an imagery function, any kind of sensor functions, power functions, and is pretty much communicating with the rest of the other CubeSats around to form the equivalent of a big, huge monolithic satellites. And if a solar flare comes in and 50% of the CubeSats are being wiped out, they would come to where they're waiting for new CubeSats to be put in and being able to work again. Sorry, I keep losing this. I apologize. What would a typical stack for microservice implementation look like on cloud infrastructure? So you would have an infrastructure layer, which is your typical storage, routers, servers, databases. An orchestration layer that's provided by the cloud providers that would allow for auto-scaling, some compute capabilities, some network capabilities, and the ability to have some kind of environment monitoring on it. A set of core services on top for login, provisioning, routing, some kind of integration of the applications and discovery of services and monitoring. And then on top of this, pretty much a set of microservices that would fulfill each of the services we were talking about, billing, contracts, operation, GIS and mapping. And these would pretty much take a few of the services, just like we described before. And all these would be pretty much auto-scaling. So as the demand goes up, more, for example, for a GIS application, more application would go. And also load balance, which means that when one of the services is not used much, the microservices would scale down and leave room for others to take over when there's a surge. So the changes in IT practice, I'm going to try to increase my pace a little bit here, is that pretty much typically in a architecture designed for failure, we have a single life ownership of the product. Anybody can exercise their own choice of platform, language, and libraries they do not have to use. So each of the services can pretty much create its own application with its own services, with its own libraries, language, and software. It is rather decentralized business and message rules. There's a decentralized governance and limited governance as well, and a decentralized data management. If you look at the diagram on the right, each microservices has its own way of storing the data, rather than the monolithic database where all the data is stored in one database for the entire application. Other change in practices, pretty much teams have to be organized around business capabilities. There needs to be cross-functional teams. And traditionally, the layer-based team is not the best way to organize because it causes cross-team collaborations and costly delays. So having multidisciplinary teams with a knowledge of the business, a knowledge of the data, and a knowledge of IT is ideal for developing each of these different services, microservices applications. And another one that happens is often in traditional monoliths, in order to not disrupt the tightly integrated nature of the traditional architecture, release cycles are very slow and very tightly checked. In this case, continuous integration and continuous deliveries are recommended. So these are very quick ways to deploy things to production, where instead of making sure that the applications are 100% and 95% perfect before they get pushed into production, automatic testing, automatic integration, and acceptance and performance testings are done in a very quick pipeline. And being able to push to production very quickly and being able to react to any systems failure or errors very quickly and change it, and capitalizing on rapidity of updates rather than quality of the updates at first. So this is a bit of a change, and it's a cultural problem often with IT teams that are used to use traditional ones. And because it is contained to only a specific set of services, the deployments are independent, it is a bit more manageable, and it does not risk to compromise the entire system. The technology recommendations, so like we said, we need to use a mixed infrastructure, cloud and on-premise. Cloud system for application development, the typical open source configuration management and on containerized architecture is what's being recommended. Hosted continuous integration service or proprietary continuation service would work as well. Cloud services usually are open source frameworks on clouds are recommended. Databases, a combination of cloud storage and various databases and search engine. Do not restrict yourself to relational database. Use whatever storage is appropriate for the application that you're using on, like search engines and graph database if needed, and GIS database if needed for the typical application that you're developing on the microservices architecture. User interface needs to be limited to web and mobile. Desktop applications are strongly not recommended for EIPs. Storage needs to be a mix of on-premise and cloud, like we said. Management is using cloud services for managing the IT infrastructure, the containers and the microservices in particular, or open source frameworks that are built to do so. The security will be a mix between the cloud identity management software in order to have the user authentication and tracking, as well as audits and evaluations of what machines and what data is being accessed. So a quick implementation example, the asset management services, there's a lot of them in the NCHRP 2103 reports. Pretty much what you see on top are the different microservices, and this is a sequence diagram that pretty much goes into the storage of an assets and the backup of a specific request to update an assets into a database. And this pretty much describes the interactions that go on between each of the microservices. And this normally would be contained in an application talking to each other. Now, how do you migrate from a traditional monolithic application to microservice architecture application? Well, the good news is you do not have to migrate your entire system. You can actually start to find the modules that are not fitting too well into a monolithic architecture. And you can pretty much, as we see there in step one, start building an interface around it and then take it out into its own microservice with its own storage and keep working in concert with the monolithic architecture. So incremental refactoring is strongly recommended in microservice architecture transition. No attempt should be made to just migrate the entire applications at once. So as far as the non-technical hurdles, what we've heard during the various workshops that we had when we showed technology recommendations is that making DOT IP sustainable will require transformation much farther than just technology recommendations and go into equipment, facilities, staff, process, procedures, organization, and culture changes. So we came up with a few strategies that could be followed by DOTs to do so. So establish stakeholders, buy-in with focus and continual outreach. So this is to be able to convey to higher level of management, which was required. There's a set of slides that can be used on the products of the NCHRP to pretty much have concise talking point to understand the needs, in particular in terms of scalability and cloud. And this was requested when people were not really convinced cloud needed to be used, or some open source software. Establish a consistent, flexible governance and to minimize frustrations. So this is sometimes to be able to not blanket the entire organization and each of the services on the IP with a single application or a single programming language, which is often done in monolithic traditional IT platforms in order to control it. But in this case, it needs to be relaxed a little bit and focus on giving more autonomy on the IT design for each of the services while retaining strong governance over user access to the data and protecting the data and going after unauthorized access. Simplify procurement. So this is another aspect that we have. So a lot of DOTs have told us that their IoT procurement or procurement offices were not very well equipped to deal with clouds and IT as a service, but more as like something that you bring into the building, you plug in and you maintain over time and you amortize over time. So these are a set of recommendations we have in the research on how to pretty much have an understanding for the IT. And some of the DOTs that we have, but I think Texas and the Pennsylvania Turnpikes were talking that they are using Texas, state of Texas, IT procurement services in order to circumvent this these hurdles. So some states have designed cloud-specific or IT-specific IT procurements in order to overcome these challenges. Another problem is the work.
Excuse me, Ben. We're out of time. So, but I would like to get some questions in. Yeah, you're okay. Okay.
Sure. Just the last slide.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
So the last slide is just pretty much finding the right workforce, because this requires new skills. And the other ones is the legal considerations often associated with sharing data or moving data out of premise into the clouds and the backup and things like that. Sorry, I mishap with the PowerPoint, but happy to answer any question.
Okay, we do have a question for you, Ben, and then we also still have one. We have one left over from Donna. Your question is: are there cloud providers that meet government regulations on data storage?
Yes, absolutely. There are the AWS Cloud and Microsoft, I believe, have certified what they call GovCloud for Amazon Web Services. They have government, federal government certified, and so these cloud services, and they don't necessarily offer all the services that the commercial ones do. Although I do believe that AWS Commercial Cloud is at the medium level certification for federal government. So some of the commercial clouds are already quite safe. But in case something higher is needed, they have cloud services that can be put on data centers that are much more secure than the commercial ones. So that can have.
I think you.
And you can pretty much acquire those softwares on a set of data centers that you can trust, and then have them deployed over there, whether it's Google, Microsoft, or Amazon.
Okay, and in case you missed that, we are going to have this session is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the follow-up from the webinar. We do have a question for Donna. It said, staffing of the system seems critical. What level of staffing does it take to keep a system current and active?
Yeah, that's a good question. We probably have. That was for me, right, Becky?
Yeah, that was for Donna. Sorry, Ben.
Okay.
Sorry,
yeah,
no
we probably have about half of a staff of development against it in a persistent way. You know, once we built the basic function, the other part of the maintenance is keeping the content up to date and making sure that we keep changing those automated actionable notifications to be in sync with whatever the current set of processes are. So there is a content piece and we call it a campaign piece, right? Keeping that campaign, checking them occasionally and making sure they're kept up to date.
Okay, thank you. And one quick one for Ben. Ben, what's the title or the number of the NCHRP study?
It's NCHRP 2103.
2103. Okay, very good. Well, we are out of time, and that's it for questions. I want to thank Donna and Ben. Both really good presentations. Thought they were very interesting, and you can tell both are passionate about their projects. And again, you will get a link for your follow-up webinar email, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in.